Hey, welcome to the TTSG Solocast Ep3. I'm Lee, and in this episode we're going to be talking about how to balance strategy, luck and player agency when designing our tabletop skirmish games. As game designers, it's our job to balance these three elements as we craft our core mechanics and gameplay loop. I've laid this out in a blog post recently, and I've looked at 7 critical aspects of finding equilibrium between strategic decision making, randomness and player empowerment. We've also talked a bit before about decision making and player agency and how important they both are for the gameplay loop. But in this episode we're going to focus more on luck and randomness. Players can make all the right decisions and all their pieces can be lined up ready to execute. But if the dice are against them, those well-formed plans can quickly go south. Luck introduces an element of unpredictability and chance to a tabletop skirmish game, enriching the overall gaming experience in several ways. So let's look at those ways now, and we'll start with suspense and excitement. The uncertainty brought by luck, whether that's through dice rolls, card draws or random events, creates suspense, anticipation and excitement during gameplay. It's so fun to roll a handful of dice, wait for them to settle and really rely on that result to see if a tactic will pay off or not. The result presents the players with then more decisions to make as they continue pushing forward for a more favourable roll, or perhaps they're forced to change course when the dreaded snake eyes reveal themselves. Now they're going to have to perhaps come up with another plan, or at least deal with the consequences of not making the successful roll. This is a big part of the game, anticipation. It's so fun not knowing what's going to happen, and luck really creates that anticipation. You may have heard the saying that anticipation is often better than realisation, and it's so true. And of course we want to get a favourable result, but when that favourable result is realised, often it just takes us down the planned route that we had in our mind. But sometimes when you get an unfavourable roll, you still get the anticipation as you build up to the result. But getting a negative result can often lead to really interesting and exciting things in gameplay. Outcomes will have consequences, and those consequences may set you down a path or a set of decision making that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about going down. We're on to the second element now, which is variability. And luck introduces variability to each game session, ensuring that no two matches are exactly the same. This adds replayability to the game, keeping it fresh and interesting even after multiple plays. The idea is that you should be able to play a scenario a number of times, and the outcome should be pretty different each time. I think Necromunda is really good at this. I remember playing a game of Necromunda against a friend at my local club, and we played a scenario where I totally wiped out his gang in a handful of rounds. The game was over quickly, and he wanted to try out his gang to see how it would perform, because it was a new gang, and I didn't do anything out of the ordinary to beat them, so we had another go. We decided to play the exact same scenario with the same gangs and gang members on each side. We even played using the same tactics to see what would happen. And in the second game, the result was completely reversed and my gang took an absolute beating. Now you could say that Necromunda skews maybe a little bit too much in one direction. And those two results were completely at opposite ends of the scale. I mean, they really were all down to the luck rolls. It didn't matter about the tactics we chose, it was really luck playing a huge part. When you're creating your game, it's up to you how you find the right balance for what you want from the game. You might want to have it similar to Necromunda, where luck plays a massive part. Or you might want to rein it back a little bit and not have it quite as chaotic as Necromunda. Because after all, Necromunda is quite a chaotic and unpredictable game, which I think adds to the narrative and is great fun, but it could be a little bit too chaotic. Now we're on to the third critical element, and that is all about surprises and dynamic moments. Randomness induced by luck can lead to unexpected twists and turns in the game, creating dynamic and cinematic moments. Whether it's a critical hit from an unlikely source or a surprise event that changes the landscape of the battlefield, luck contributes to the narrative richness of your game. I'm sure you can think of a game where you've played where it all comes down to some of the last few actions that you carry out in the last round of gameplay, and often it can come down to the roll of a dice. For me, those are some of the most fun games because you've both played really well, you've got to the end, it could go either way, and fate is deciding the way it goes. So you've kind of lost a little bit of control, but your player agency and your decision making has at least got you to the point where it's a 50-50 decision, and I think that's awesome. Now we're on to the fourth critical element, which is strategic adaptation. The presence of luck encourages players to adapt their strategies on the fly. Unforeseen outcomes may force players to re-evaluate their plans and make strategic adjustments, which all add depth to their decision-making process. My new game, Population Z, comes out in January 2024, and searching plays a huge role in that game, and players must roll to beat their luck characteristic to decide if they find anything. With limited actions and that ever-present threat of zombies closing in from all directions, players have to decide how many searches to carry out while keeping their distance, maintaining effective weapon range, and also working towards the objectives. If they use their first action to search and they get an unlucky roll and don't find anything, then they have to decide, do they roll again and try and search to find something, or do they just move away and try to work towards maybe another objective, try and create a little bit more distance? And this is where strategic adaptation comes in. And as I used to hear in the Royal Navy a lot, we would be then forced to improvise, adapt and overcome. Now let's talk about the fifth critical element, which is luck as an equalising factor. Luck can serve as an equalising factor in games where there is a skill disparity between players. A less experienced player may have a chance to turn the tables through a fortunate roll of the dice, keeping the game accessible and enjoyable for players of varying skill levels. While this sounds great, we do often see it exploited in some of the bigger games like Warhammer 40,000, especially with hyper-competitive players choosing to memorise the probability of dice rolls and building armies that tip the probability in their favour. There's certainly a place for that, but for me that goes against the spirit of play and is something best kept for competitive games against other players who want to compete in that way. I've been thinking about play a lot recently and what it means to play. You know, we play sports which are competitive, and sometimes you can take that approach to a tabletop game, especially the competitive ones like Warhammer 40,000. You're playing to win, maybe. Whereas when I look at playing tabletop skirmish games, I think of it in the childish sense of play. I want to have fun. I want to get together with my friends and family around the table and maybe play in a more collaborative way rather than a competitive way. That's what I enjoy. As I always say, there's no right way to play, and you play how you want to play. If you have fun being competitive, then you go for it. Be as competitive as possible. And don't let anyone tell you there's anything wrong with that. But I think you're going to settle on your own style of play. Once you've been playing tabletop skirmish games and war games for a while, you'll kind of be attracted to different kinds of people and ways to play. Recently, I saw a video and discovered a channel on YouTube called Games Night. And the way they play some of their games of bolt action is just fantastic. I saw one where they used bolt action rules, Flames of War models, and they got an Indiana Jones model, and then they played out a kind of scenario from one of the movies. And it was so much fun. They looked like they were really enjoying themselves. And once I found that channel, I decided, you know what, that's how I want to play my games. And I've been heavily influenced by their whole vibe. I think it's awesome. And definitely check it out. I'll put a link in the description down below so you can find their channel and have a look. I'd never seen games played like that before on the table, and I was kind of heading towards a bit of a competitive route, if I'm honest, and I wasn't enjoying myself all that much, and I always like playing narrative games more, but seeing what they did and how flexible you can take a rule set, introduce your own homebrewed rules to it, it's all so much fun, very creative, yeah, and I really resonated with that. So that's the direction I'm going in, certainly with Population Z, and I'm really focusing on solo and co-op play moving forward now. One other thing they do, I noticed that's really cool, is they have like a games master, a GM, and then have two players. And the GM is guiding the gameplay. Maybe people aren't familiar with the rules that much, and that's a really good way to do it as well. And then the three people playing all bounce off each other, creates a really nice atmosphere. And just, even though the two players are actually going up against each other, it feels more collaborative all round. Just a great way to play. Okay, that should bring us on nicely to critical element number 6, thematic immersion. And in many cases, luck aligns with the thematic elements of the game. For example, a skirmish set in a chaotic and unpredictable world like Necromunda might incorporate randomness to mirror the uncertainties of battle in an environment that's fraught with backstabbing characters and dodgy dealings. A grenade exploding in the hands of the character, or a missed shot hitting a friendly fighter instead of the enemy. You just never know what's going to happen with Necromunda, and that makes it really fun. Other themes might require a bit less chaos, like we talked about earlier, and I think bolt action could be a good example of this. The army rules provide some unique qualities to the chosen forces, which would be factions, but overall the sides are usually quite similar. Luck then plays a big part in the outcome of the battle as it drives narrative and immerses players in the theme as the advantage moves back and forth as the game progresses. Now, bolt action's got a nice mechanic built in, so it seems to be balancing luck to some degree, but then the unpredictability of activation adds a different layer to it, which I think is really interesting. If you're not familiar with bolt action, players will take a dice for each of their units, put those into a bag at the beginning of each round, and then when it's time to activate a unit, you put your hand in the bag, pull out a dice, and whichever player owns that dice can then choose which unit to activate. Now, it could be a case that the same player activates 3, 4, even 5 times in a row, and it's always going to be a different order. It's a great system, and I think while it's less chaotic than Necromunda in general gameplay, this activation system just adds a little bit of randomness, enough to mix it up and keep it interesting. It's also very thematic, as the battle seems to swing back and forth with the advantage going to one side. Maybe they make a little bit of an advancement and start to get the edge over the enemy, but then the enemy can then react to that if they pull out their dice next and maybe stop the advance coming too far forward, and it just goes back and forth like that throughout the whole game. Very fun game. I highly recommend bolt action, and now that's my go-to big scale war game at the moment. Okay, now we're on to critical element number 7, risk and reward. Luck introduces this element of risk and reward to our tabletop skirmish games. Players may choose to take chances for potentially high rewards, adding a strategic level to their decision making. And balancing risk and reward becomes a crucial aspect of gameplay. While luck brings these positive aspects to tabletop skirmish games, it's important to balance it with strategic elements to avoid excessive reliance on chance. Striking the right equilibrium ensures that luck enhances the gaming experience without overshadowing the importance of player skill and decision making. And I think we see that in Necromunda, where players' skill and decision making is great, but the luck can go a little bit too far for some. But this is all part of the challenge of game design, and why I love it so much. Just playing around with this element of luck, risk and reward, and all the other critical elements we've talked about so far. These all come together to create the vibe of our game and exactly how it's going to be received by players. Okay, we've talked about luck in tabletop skirmish games, but now let's talk about 3 ways that we can actually balance it with strategy. Methods for mitigating the impact of luck, such as introducing strategic options, meaningful choices, or abilities that allow players to manipulate probabilities, all play a crucial role in this balancing act. When we get it right, players can excel while still allowing luck to provide excitement and unpredictability, creating a game that appeals to a broad audience of different skill levels. There are 3 main areas we can work on to balance luck with strategy. So let's explore those now, and we'll start with the first one, skill-based mechanics. Incorporating skill-based mechanics rewards player proficiency and strategic thinking. Mechanics like line-of-sight calculations, terrain manipulation, or timing-based actions all require precision and critical thinking, which come together to enhance player agency. These mechanics give players opportunities for competitive advantages and add yet another layer of depth to the overall experience. A great way to introduce skill-based mechanics that give players control is to provide characters with different abilities that complement or sometimes even oppose each other. When players can choose which characters they can take into battle, they can formulate tactics with those abilities in mind. In Population Z, player agency was something I wanted to introduce immediately, and one of the first things you'll do in the game is create your group of survivors. For each survivor, you'll choose a job, hobby and skill, and each of these will come with unique abilities. It's a simple process, but the combinations are immense. There's 10 jobs, 10 hobbies, and 10 skills, so you can combine those for many possible combinations, probably more than you'll ever use in the game. The outcomes are rich and varied, and during gameplay, I'm finding that players are picking out interesting relationships between their survivors, and that makes for excellent manoeuvres and tactics. Each job and hobby has 4 abilities linked to it, and they're in a chain. Once you've unlocked the first ability in that chain, you can use what's called survivor tokens to unlock the next one, and you work your way in order, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, once you start unlocking those, as a player, you're going to receive more options, you can make more meaningful decisions based on those options, and you can come up with more possible combinations between your survivors. It's my favourite part of the game. Me and my son love making characters, coming up with these different abilities and then seeing how they play out on the table. Really good stuff. Okay, now let's have a look at the second way we can balance luck with strategy, and that is to adjust the degree of randomness. We've already seen that there's a fine line between high randomness for casual play and perhaps lower randomness for competitive or strategic play, and how important it is for us to find the right balance for our games. It's vital in meeting the expectations of our target audience too, so we have to pay a lot of attention to it. But once we achieve that balance, we then have to think about how to provide some mechanics for players to adjust it themselves during gameplay. Mechanics that enable players to control or mitigate randomness provide a further sense of control and strategic depth. This can be achieved by simply re-rolling a result, applying modifiers, or even adding an extra dice to the dice pool. When I was designing Population Z, I created a series of probability tables for each character type, and in the game they come in 3 different sizes. And I also created tables for melee and ranged attacks. I made tables for each weapon, and then I used those tables to see what will happen when dice can be re-rolled, modified, and also what happens if extra dice are added to the pool. These tables have proved invaluable in adjusting the degree of randomness, and I've been able to use them to make the game play out thematically as I planned. For example, I wanted melee attacks to be more deadly, so there's a higher chance of causing damage in those melee attacks. I also wanted terrain to be an important part of the game, so cover makes a massive difference as players use it to negotiate the battlefield and close in on objectives. Now I've got another game that's going to soon follow Population Z. It's a sci-fi solo co-op game that uses the same core rules for the basics of movement, interaction with the environment, that kind of thing, but it'll be tailored to fit the new environment, and then weapons, interaction with NPCs and the AI system will all be tweaked so it better suits it too. But for that game, I was able to manipulate those tables to make the randomness fit new weapons, change the effectiveness of enemies, and even flip it so that range weapons now become the ones to watch out for. I'll probably do a blog post on these tables at some point. There's quite a lot to cover in that though, but I think I should, because I think it'd be really helpful for you and your game, and definitely look into creating those probability tables if you're at the early stages of your game right now. Now we're on to the third area that we can work on to balance luck and strategy, and that's a big one. It's iterative playtesting and feedback. Recently I wrote about the importance of playtesting and iterative refinement on my blog, and I can't go on about this enough. It's so important. The journey to a well-balanced tabletop skirmish game involves continuous playtesting and feedback. Playtesters play a crucial role in identifying potential imbalances, frustrations, or excessive reliance on luck. The iterative process of refining mechanics, adjusting those probabilities, and fine-tuning the balance between strategy, luck, and player agency is essential for creating a polished and enjoyable game, but also to crafting that game and moulding it into the game you had in mind at the beginning of your process. But that said, sometimes you could end up with quite a different game at the end of the creation process than the one you thought you would end up with when you began it. In Population Z, I created a heavy machine gun weapon that I thought was designed with the correct number of shots and damage output. Playtesting revealed a flaw in that it didn't feel like it caused enough damage for the action cost when its unique ability was used. Now this came from the player, and it's all about player experience, and so getting that feedback was essential. Now, you can't just rely on that, so I checked the tables, and it proved correct. So from play testing, I was able to get player feedback as like a feeling, so a general feeling of the game. This didn't feel quite right. Not enough damage was done, the risk seemed to not match up with the reward, and then when I was checking it against the tables, I could see that feeling came across in the probabilities too. So I changed it within the tables, and it was good to go. But it's things like that can be easily overlooked without proper playtesting. Since playtesting Population Z, I've now started to introduce what I call mini sessions, where I only use one weapon or one ability. Then I'll play out quick scenarios, repeating the use of that weapon and ability over and over again. And this is something you can just do on your own. You don't need other players to do this. You could even just do it at your desk. You don't need to set up an area. You can just go through it, rolling dice, imagining in your mind, just using some little miniatures as representations, and just going through little scenarios to make sure things work. Now this has worked out nicely, and I definitely recommend giving it a go for your game. My next planned mini session is going to be for each of the different grenade types, and I want to see how the conditions of each grenade, because they can be quite different. I want it to come across in quite a simple way, but each have a very unique effect. So that's going to be an important session. And then once I've done these mini sessions, I can take it, see what players think, and then come back and refine it further. Let's wrap things up then, and by balancing luck, strategy, and player agency, we can create tabletop skirmish games that offer engaging decision making, exciting moments of chance, and a strong sense of player control. Striking the right equilibrium ensures a game that appeals to both strategic thinkers and those who relish the thrill of unpredictability, ultimately resulting in a captivated and well-rounded gaming experience. It's not easy to achieve balance, and the process presents many problems to solve along the way. But that's the appeal. That's why tabletop skirmish game design is so fun. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the subject, so join in the conversation in the comments down below. It'd be great to hear what you think, and I always get stuck in and reply to the comments as well, so I do see everything that goes down there. So yeah, it'd be awesome to hear from you. If you like to read blog posts, then head over to my website. I'll put a link down below where you can read all the blog posts that tie in with this new series. So anything I cover here in an episode, you can be assured there'll be a blog post about it too. Look out for my new game, Population Z, Welcome to Huntsville, launching in January 2024. You're going to see a lot more about it over the next few months, so keep an eye out here on YouTube, and also come and join me on Facebook. I've got the Facebook group there, and my main Facebook page. I hang out there most of the time, and if you'd like to join, there's links down below. I also post links to my blog post on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, but most of the time you'll find me on Facebook or here on YouTube. Thanks again for listening. If you did enjoy it or you got anything from the podcast at all, it'd be brilliant if you hit the like button, subscribe to keep up to date with all the new episodes, and I look forward to seeing you here next time on the TTSG Solocast.